Okay, good morning again, and I have one more person coming in. So today we're going to look at the Rococo architecture in Italy, and to be exact, it's, Rococo is only one part of the 18th century, though most of the architecture I will show you is pretty much the Rococo style. And then I will finish with an artist who I adore, it's Piranesi. Piranesi, I have to say with the Italian accent. So let's go into the 18th century architecture. It's an interesting phenomenon with the architecture in Italy is that it's really difficult to study because there's not too much scholar studies. There is one book that studies 17th and 18th century architecture, and it's almost unique in Italy, of course, almost unique in the world of books. Uh, what happens too is that there is a very large number of new buildings, and so to make a choice to see what is the most important is quite interesting. As I mentioned, there is a dual tradition. One goes to the 17th century architects and sculptor Bernini and Borromini, but also they're looking back at the Cinquecento, which is the 16th century, and then classical antiquity. Because there's such a large repertory from which they can choose, there's a great versatility in the styles that we're going to see. There's also late Baroque classicism in Rome, Turin, and Naples, very different to what we will see in Venice. The Italian Rococo is really made of imaginative decoration, curvilinear shapes, as we've seen in France too, and spatial complexities. I think we have already seen a lot of that in painting with Tiepolo. But in architecture, we have the same thing. So let's look at some of the architecture. Carlo Fontana is an architect who is going to straddle between the 17th and 18th century. And he did some really wonderful works, quite a bit of works. He was born in Bussato near Como. He's one of these architects that actually come from Switzerland and is going to work in Italy. Switzerland doesn't have itself a lot of Rococo monuments to per se, but had quite an architectural school and sent its architects to Italy, to Vienna and St. Petersburg. So we will see them when we go to these regions, but this is what Switzerland produced. We can see the articulation of the facade of Carlo Fontana here with the San Marcello al Corso in Rome, where, as very typical of the Baroque architecture, the facade is not flat. It has some curves coming back with a concave inside, but then some order, some columns with Corinthian capitals around, and then some really pretty features and statues of the saint. Carlo Fontana made a project, and it's really interesting to see, to build a cathedral in the very middle of the Colosseum. That was supposed to be made, and of course never was, but I imagine it just, to me, is almost similar to the cathedral in the middle of the Mesquite in Cordoba in Spain. But so this was the project for it. He also wanted to complete the Piazza San Pietro that had been, of course, started by Bernini, and he wanted to finish, add some more buildings, and that wasn't done either. One of the most beautiful places in Rome is definitely what we call the Spanish Step, the Scalinata della Trinità dei Monti, extraordinary staircase that leads from the Piazza di Spagna at the bottom all the way to the Church of the Trinità dei Monti. It's a very interesting concept. The upper part, the Trinità dei Monti, belonged to the French government and housed many French orders. And so between the bottom, where was the embassy, Spanish embassy, and then the north, you had these steps that were linking both. This is actually the longest and widest staircase in all of Europe. It has 138 steps. It was built with the funds from the French diplomat Etienne Geffier in 1723 to 25. Here is the plan, and it shows that very pretty, very, I would say almost musical build with all these curves and concave shapes. And then, of course, the real thing that has been known until now, because you could go and sit on the steps and just degustate a lovely gelato. It's now forbidden for people to sit on the steps. They have to move on and allow people to go up and down. Another interesting architect is Filippo Raguzzini. He is responsible for the building that you see here, and you can imagine the difficulty of setting a building in such a small space. So you had that closeness of all the other buildings, and to integrate it in a gracious way was absolutely extraordinary. So the Piazza di San Ignazio is situated between the Via del Corso and the Pantheon. Oh, sorry, what happened there? Yes, here is the building, in fact, so you saw the plan first. But so again, by the articulation and just the curves that the buildings have built on are just quite gracious and beautiful. It is during that time too that the famous Fontana Trevi will be built by Nicola Salvi. And this is really that kind of mixture of triumphal arch, but also Rococo shell. So you have that very large triumphal arch that is the back, the decor, if you want, for the rest of the fountain that comes up, is really attached to the palace that is behind. So we have some figure of the ocean, the god of the ocean, the Oceanus, and then abundance and salubrity framing him. Then you have the beautiful horses held by naiads and demigod that really decorate all that cascade of water. The story goes that there was a stubborn barbers that had a sign on the side here of the palace and wouldn't remove it. And so they put a sculpted vase there to prevent the sign to be seen. So these were some of the interesting stories. The backdrop of the fountain is the Palazzo Poli, which is given that new facade with the arch. You can see the influence of, and here is the ocean, the god of ocean. But you can see how he's been influenced by some of Borromini's buildings, the Falconieri Palace that he's seen. So you can see a similarity between the upper floor and here and the central arch here. Another view of the famous Fontana di Trevi. Of course, Fontana Trevi, you turn your back, you throw a coin in the water and make a wish and don't tell anybody what it is. Now, as I mentioned, there's an enormous amount of building that were designed and accomplished during the 18th century. Not too much is ever said about Sicily. Sicily, as you know, is a very seismic area, so lots of temblor, as they say, so a lot of earthquakes down there. And so that has caused, of course, the rebuilding of many places. We're going to concentrate on these three places, Ragusa, Nolo, and Catania. Catania being at the foot of the Etna that you can see just next to it. So Rosario Gagliardi built the San Giorgio in 1744. Sicily had been devastated by an earthquake in 1693. And so a lot of the buildings were rebuilt on the sites. Very rhythmic, very beautiful architecture, very typical of the time. Another one in Noto here is the Church of the Madre di San Nicolo, also rebuilt after the earthquake, and unfortunately suffered another earthquake in 1996. And as you can see, was very badly damaged. And here's a view of Catania, just at the foot of the volcano Etna, which is most of the time is in activity. In Catania, the Duomo, so the cathedral, was built after the earthquake, rebuilt in that very precious Baroque. Again, you can see the similarities with what else we have seen, the very gracious articulation that is punctuated with columns, and then typically always enriched with the statue of the saint to whom the church is dedicated. Also in Catania is the square of the cathedral that has been built at that time by the same architect. And the Palazzo Madama, we're moving north now and go to Turin, where Juvara made a lot of work. Juvara was actually born in Messina, so just across from in Sicily, from a family of goldsmiths and engraver. He had some of his formative years in Sicily, and then moved to Rome in 1704. Did some work in Rome, and then moved up to Turin, where he got some very large commissions. The Palazzo Madama became the residence of Christine Marie of France. He designed that palace with some very beautiful white stone. Inside, again, you can see these very elegant arches with some thin columns and beautiful coffered ceilings, very rhythmic again, balconies. He also got the commission for the Stupinigi Palace. This shows the exterior court facade in Turin, very large palace, as you can see. This was actually a very modest hunting lodge that was built for Vittorio Amadeo II of Savoy. In 1832, just for history, the ownership passed to the royal family and became the property of the state. Inside, an absolutely incredible decoration. This is the Great Hall in the same palace with gold and the colors that are more typical of the Rococo period. Again, as you can see, the very rhythmic balconies and the piers supporting that heavy roof. Also houses a chinoiserie, a Chinese room. Many of the palaces, will see many of them in Germany and in Austria, had that room. That was a big fad. China had opened up a little bit and people were collecting lacquers, plaques that they would integrate into the inner decoration of these rooms, called chinoiserie. One of the largest commissions he received is for the Basilica de Superga that you can see quite high up on the mountain. The story goes that in 1706, the princes Vittorio Amadeo II and Eugenio of Savoy climbed the high hill to observe the position of the Franco-Spanish army that had been besieging the town for 4 months, and made a vow to dedicate the site to the Holy Mother of Graces for the liberation of Turin. And that vow, which consisted in that commitment of that grand church, was made before the wooden statue of the Holy Mother, now kept in the chapel, was found. So they did get rid of the French and so on. And so they started the construction, which was including the lowering of the hill by about 40 meters, which is about 120 feet, to create a wide enough area to build that enormous basilica. It was dedicated in 1731, though it was not quite finished. But it shows a very interesting plan. It's a circular plan, and then you have some wings that protrude from it. Typical of the colors that you find in that region, you have that kind of ochre yellow that is really pretty and makes the columns of white stone come out really beautifully. Of course, the landscape is grand. The interior is extremely opulent, as you can see, gorgeous marbles of different colors inside, large columns, and beautiful, again, decoration, windows that make it a very light interior. And then, as we have seen, still by Juvara, he is going to be called to Madrid to design the new royal palace after the Alcazar burned down at the end of at the beginning of the 18th century. And so he designed this, but died shortly after he designed it, and it was continued by some of his assistants. And we've seen that prior to this with the decoration inside by Tiepolo and Mengs. One of the very important figures in the 18th century is a German man by the name of Joachim Winckelmann. Winckelmann was born in Stendal in Brandenburg in 1717. He was coming from a rather poor family and struggled early on to try to make some studies that would satisfy him. He became a student of theology at the University of Halle in 1738, and then went on with medical classes at Jena in 1740. Was able to become the private secretary and tutor to rich families that took him as a guide, if you want, to go to Rome on the Grand Tour. And so that he would helped them understand, because he was so knowledgeable in classical literature and classical art. He became such a specialist that he was hired in 1755 by a Roman cardinal to describe the antique statues of the Cortile of Belvedere. And this was what initiated the writing of his thoughts on the imitation of Greek works in painting and sculpture. He became really central into a debate for what was better, the Greek works or the Roman works. As he is going to be called to Herculaneum and Pompeii, he's going to face himself a lot of Greek art that had been imported to decorate Pompeii, and he could identify these. And then he could see the architecture by the Romans, and he'd been to Rome too. And so he debated a lot about what was the better. And of course, the Greek were extraordinary and pretty much the initiators of the perfect and idealized works in sculpture. And unfortunately, we don't have any examples, but in painting too, by what we read in literature. But the Roman became, with a very practical mind, became really the specialist in architecture. And we'll talk about that again. In 1756, he will be hired by the Cardinal Passioni, and then the Cardinal Albani to be their librarian. In 58, he will meet another German, Anton Mengs, who is going to be fascinated by the works of Winkelmann, and is going to be the promoter of a new style that is called the neoclassical art, we will see at the very end of this series. He will be named prefect of antiquities by Pope Clement XIII, and goes on writing a letter about the discoveries at Herculaneum, report on the latest discoveries at Herculaneum, and the history of ancient art among the Greeks. There is a really sad story that the way he died. In 1768, he had journeyed north over the Alps, but he didn't care for Tyrol and decided to return to Italy. On his way, he met in an inn, if you want, a young man by the name of Arcangeli, who thought that Winkelmann had a lot of money, and he killed him. Unfortunately, he was himself executed a month later on a very, very painful death, breaking on the wheel. So unfortunately for that terrible end, but Winkelmann is going to play a role. He really is becoming the father of archaeology. He will be in charge to catalog, to identify a lot of the works that were found in both Herculaneum and Pompeii. He is called, therefore, the prophet and founding hero of modern archaeology. Here is a self-portrait by Anton Mengs, who, as I say, is going to be quite influenced by Winkelmann. Winkelmann regretted, in the sense that Anton Mengs had not more creativity, more genius, if you want. He was an okay painter, but he was definitely not a very creative one. Though both Winkelmann and Mengs are going to meet with Jacques-Louis David, the French painter, and are going to really impress on him with all their new discoveries of Greek and Roman art. And Jacques-Louis David is going to be the literally flag bearer, if you want, of the new style of neoclassicism in France. And as we know, also is going to have quite an influence on the French Revolution. He is one of his very known paintings, The Death of Socrates. Who is influenced by Winkelmann and all these discoveries? Robert Adam, the architect and interior designer, this is an example of some of his decoration of sign house on the outskirts of London. And we'll come back to neoclassicism later on. Of course, Pompeii and Herculaneum were visited by him in 1758 and 62. This shows you the location. This is Herculaneum and this is Pompeii. So different location and therefore a different way of being covered. One will be covered by lava, the other one by these clouds with stones. And just to remind you the extraordinary things that were found in Pompeii, so kind of stopping life just at that very moment in 79 AD. But the 18th century is also the witness of a great invention, and we're talking about the piano. It's around 1700 that Bartolomeo Cristofori, who was working at the court of Ferdinando de' Medici, who was at that time Grand Prince of Tuscany, he was a harpsichord maker, and then try to find a way to have an instrument that would hold the sound. And so with an incredible ingenuity, he's going to put together a very difficult, really very complicated mechanic that is going to make the sound last. And this is because the strings are not plucked anymore, but are going to be struck by wooden hammers that are coated with a softer material. And at first will be leather, and then only later, and that's what you have now in pianos, it's covered by felt. The first name of the piano was Un cimbalo di cipresso di piano e forte. And therefore it's going to be shortened in piano forte, which means soft and loud. And then finally, we'll keep just the piano, which means soft. It can be also called forte piano. For example, the piano that Mozart was exposed to were at that time forte piano, which entailed a different kind of mechanism too. So I found the oldest piano in the world that is actually at the Met. We don't have the original piano around 1700. We know that there was one at the court of Ferdinando de' Medici, but at the Met, they have the oldest one that dates back to 1720. And I found a lovely recording that's going to make you realize how different the sound of piano was then. This is a piece by Domenico Scarlatti. So this is really interesting because if you could hear, the sound is still a little closer to a harpsichord. And actually the piece by Scarlatti is still very close to the way they had to compose to try to sustain the notes. So the little trill that you have was the only way for them to keep the sound. And this at first is a little similar. Another really interesting point in the 18th century is the novelty in theater, scenery, and design. The opera as well as theater had seen a great improvement in the 17th century, but it's really in the 18th century that we see absolutely incredible decors, and therefore really an improvement on these spectacles that became extremely popular. So the proscenium arch was added in the 18th century, so really at the very front of the stage. Then you have perspective settings. We'll see some examples. And the mechanics of all these sceneries became so perfected that they were able to shift very rapidly the sceneries and come with quite special effects. One very big name in theater scenery is the Bibbiena family that created around the 1700s some angled perspective, and as well as they changed the scales of settings. They were extremely influential. They actually, some of them did also some architectural work because it was pretty much in the same field. Piranesi, Piranesi, as I have to say with the cadence in Italian, Piranesi is going to, that we'll see later, is also going to work in theater scenery and introduce some mood with different lighting. And so he was using light and shadow to create certain emotional atmosphere. So who were the great playwrights at the time? We have Goldoni, who's still pretty known. Uh, Pieces like The Servants of Two Masters and Comic Theater, and then Gozzi with The King's Stag and The Magic Bird. There were also some tragedies with Vittorio Alfieri, who was showing some extremely powerful emotions. What is going to be interesting, I'm going to show you some opera houses, many opera houses in Italy. We don't forget, we just talk about Italy right now. The opera houses were built, this is the oldest one that was built in Naples in 1737. Has been, of course, restored since, but this gives you an idea that apparently the acoustic was so extraordinary that musicians were fighting to get performances there. Others in Bologna, the Sala Bibbiena, so taking the name of these great sceneries designers. La Fenice in Venice, that burned actually recently. It burned many times, but recently was rebuilt, and this is in 2015. Extraordinary Rome. And then La Scala in Milan also has been rebuilt, I mean, and redecorated, but is one of the latest one. Just for you to have an idea, this is a court theater in Vienna, and we will see along our voyage around Europe, we will try to see other opera houses that were built during that time. But that gives you an idea. I love all the guards standing around, so you were well protected. But you can see the proscenium here, where these decors normally that would frame the whole piece and would change, different one. Here's one that I think is just extraordinary and shows you an idea. This is by Ludovico Burnacini, the set design for Held Mouse, that comes one scene of the production of the opera Il Pomodoro. Imagine, so this is all that kind of a proscenium, if you want. And then within you had that fake water, you had a barge moving, you had devils coming down held by ropes. It was absolutely extraordinary. And in the back you had the fire. So it was all these red pieces of cloth that would mimic fire. Quite extraordinary piece. This is another one by the Bibbiena family. It shows you in this architectural capriccio gives you an idea of a decorated palace interior with some figures banqueting. This is the draft for the stage design of Didonia Abbandonata that we're going to hear in a minute too. So imagine the size and the intricacy of these decors. And this is another illustration with a military camp. As you can see, these are on the stage, and then you have in the back the illusion that it goes on for forever. So I found some 17th and 18th century examples of the opera. You will also have a feel for something that's quite different compared to what comes in the 19th century. So this is from Antonio Cesti Il Pomodoro. Okay, let's do another one. This is from Cesti, Laurentia, very different.
Orontea in the Baroque Festival of Innsbruck. Orontea by Cesti, so one of the masterpieces of the 17th century.
It's very different from Monteverdi. It's very different from Handel. He lives in this middle zone, and it's very clear to see the development from the early 17th century to the beginning of the sort of middle Baroque. Is completely delicious in that it's all the characters have love interests. Sometimes the love interests work, so some people get together, some people choose the right lover, some people choose the wrong lover.
Okay, you have a chance to listen more of that. Absolutely wonderful, Domenico Sajo, Didonia Abbandonata. Okay, I have to move forward. The opening is gorgeous, by the way. But we have to. soundboard that if you look at my.
Anne, I can't hear you.
Okay, hold on. Okay, can you hear me now? You can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
Very softly.
I'm at the maximum almost.
Yeah, your volume is way down from our side. I mean, we can't hear you.
Okay, let me see. Anyway, we're going to take a break now before we start with Piranesi, and I'm going to open it probably because it kind of.
Can't hear you at all, Anne.
I think she's logging back on. Oh,
I can hear Jeffrey.
yeah.
I can hear you, but I can't hear Ann.
I can't
No,
hear-
it started when she was showing the videos.
It started when you showed the first opera.
Right.
No.
Is that Ann laughing?
No, it's me.
Oh, oh, I thought we had her back for a minute.
Oh,
Anne, you are gone.
oh, maybe start over.
Start over. Can't hear you.
Ay, ay, ay.
I heard aye, aye, aye. Barely.
If I speak, oh, I see. Let me see.
We lost your sound when you started the videos.
Work on it. I'm just trying to see. I see it's really low, and I don't know why I can't move it.
Barely hear. And we're not on mute anymore, maybe.
How is it now?
Oh, better.
Better.
That works.
It's still not great.
No?
No, that's all right. It was your, I wonder if your mute was doing it.
No. It was something else.
Oh,
So
good. I can hear you now.
Yeah, you sound fine now.
You're muted, Anne. You're muted now.
Okay,
Oh,
Okay.
good.
it's coming back. Okay, so take 5. And-
Okay.
Or you can tell me what you think about the opera and about the piano.
The piano is really neat.
Yeah. So that's the oldest piano in the world at the Metropolitan Museum.
Wow. You know what it sounds like? It sounds like music that you hear in current films about that era.
Yeah, they typically try to, to be historic, if you want. So
Yeah, I was surprised at that.
And the scenery was amazing.
the piano is going to go through a whole series of modification. Just the soundboard is going to be at first purely wood, and then they're going to add some metal. Also, they're going to add pedals that at that time don't exist. So it's but the very first piano comes around 1700. We don't have the date.
Wow.
So I thought you might be interested. And as far as the opera, one that I didn't show because he is
Spanish stuff.
Oh,
be careful because
I didn't either.
so the Vivaldi composed 50 operas. Unfortunately, most of them have been lost.
Oh,
So only a few have remained. And if you go on YouTube, you can put Vivaldi opera, and you will find a few. But I thought the others were not as known, and you might be interested to hear it. Very different, the treatment of voice. Now, remember that by the mid 18th century, we have a big figure comes in Austria, and we talk about Mozart. So we'll talk about that when we talk about Austria. But he is going to very much change the style of the opera compared to what we just saw now. And of course, in the 19th century, you could hear how incredibly difficult the treatment of the voice for women was. They were really, these changes of tone and rhythm are very difficult. That's going to become later on in the 19th century what we call the bel canto, with these big ranges from the low to the high, but completely different style. So anyway, I don't know if everybody is there. You
I
might.
am.
Okay, everybody's there. Then I'm going to move back to the speaker view, and we're going to go on with the Venetian who defined Rome's image. And Giovanni Battista Piranesi, who was born in Veneto, is going to have an incredible impact on the way people are looking at Rome. You see here on the top a self-portrait, an engraving with self-portrait. And on the bottom here, the tomb in Santa Maria del Priorato in Rome, where he's buried. So he was born in Venice. He will study architecture under his uncle when he's only 15. And then at age 20, he will come to Rome with the Venetian envoy to the Vatican. He's going to study etching and engraving with Giuseppe Vassi, who was known engraver at that time. And who is, it's interesting, he's going to think that he was too good of a painter to become a good engraver. And this is actually to be proved wrong. The reason why Giuseppe Vassi is going to say that is that towards the end of his apprenticeship with him, Tiepolo has gone back and forth to Venice and has, Piranesi has gone back and forth to Venice and has worked with Tiepolo. And of course, Tiepolo was the great master at the time. And he's going to find really, let me see, because I don't think I have muted you guys. Yeah, I have to mute you all. And so his style is going to change, but within his engravings, we find some interesting treatment of the engraving that are very close to painting, and he's very unique in that. In 1743, he's going to come up with the first big series of etchings. There are different kinds. So this is the prima parte di architettura e prospettive. So first part of architecture and perspective. Then 2 years later, he will do another series that are what they call vedute, views of the old and modern Rome. Then the one that are absolutely extraordinary are his carceri d'invenzione that he will do in 2 different periods. So he will start the whole series in 1745. And then 15 years later, he will take again all these plates and make them much more dramatic. And I will have them side by side so you can appreciate yourself the difference. And these are really some pure invention. It's purely fictive work, but it's incredibly impressive of views of prisons, according to him. Then he will have a series in 1756 of Le Antiquità Romane, so the antique, the Rome antique, if you want. In 61, he will become member of the Accademia di San Luca, and 17 years later, he will die in Rome after a long disease that really had quite an impact on him physically. And he was buried in Santa Maria del Priorato. He created during his lifetime over 2,000 plates, which is an incredible number of work. The early works that we find are what they call the I groteschi. And I groteschi goes back to the grotesque. I've had many questions about that. These were the decorations that you find everywhere in Venice that were part of the framing of paintings with these very kind of natural vegetation type of decoration that would frame the paintings, and that were coming originally from the word grotto. So these cave-like structure that people had in their large gardens where they would have fountains and statues. So coming from grotto comes from grotesque, in Italian groteschi. So in this example, for example, of the groteschi, when we first look at it, we have that feeling of these very pretty and very curvilinear shapes. Once you look a little closer, you realize that this is not as pretty as you can imagine. You see some skeleton and skulls, some broken columns and broken vases that are in fact giving you a sense of anxiety and sadness, because all that beautiful art that existed is let go very badly. This is very much what Piranesi is witnessing when he comes to Rome, is all that beautiful antique architecture that Rome was so famous for has been left in really bad shape. So the decay is prominent there. Then he's going to start a new series. It's going to be actually split between two parts. And the first one is Architettura and Prospettive, so architecture and perspective. He starts that in 1743. It's only made of 12 etchings. And this is the frontispiece, so the first page of that series. Again, we see all kind of old Roman buildings and arches that are really falling apart, and then people coming to look at it, wondering about the past beauty of it. At first, his lines are really thin and the work is very detailed. He's going to lose that in giving something more romantic with time. So at the same time, he's going to devote himself to the measurement of much of the ancient edifices that existed around Rome. The first work in that series, he's then issuing a new series, the first part of it, which is going to be made of 34 etchings about the magnificence of Rome. And this is the first part, the frontispiece of that first part, again, showing all kind of monuments that are falling apart, broken columns and statues that are toppled, or in this case, missing arms and so on. He is often in the etchings that we will see later. At first, he shows a lot of perspective. So it's multiple monuments, or a monument that is surrounded by houses, just as we see here the Temple of Cybele, that is part of that series of Vedute di Roma, where you see the temple with plants growing in the roof, plants all around. And we know that once the root system goes in there, that's the way it explodes the stones, and it becomes purely ruins. You see that there is some laundry hanging at the door, and a whole series of wheels that are leaning on the old temple. The cult of Cybele had been brought to Rome during the Second Punic War around 200 years BCE, and had become part of the different cults that existed in Rome. In Rome, she was known, Cybele was known as the Magna Mater, the Great Mother. In the Villa de Mecenas at Tivoli, again, we see what Piranesi is moving along. So he shows these very strong perspectives, and also a scale that is, of course, making the monument even larger. If you see the size of the people that are part of the building up in the arches or on the ground, this is totally distorted. Of course, the human being compared to that would be much larger. But in doing so, he makes the whole architecture look enormous. And it is known that when people in other countries saw the prints by Piranesi, they were in awe. And when they came to Rome, were often disappointed because it wasn't as grand as they imagined with the scale that Piranesi was showing them to. The Pyramid of Cestius, very reminiscent of the pyramids in Nubia, so south of Egypt. There's a whole series of pyramids, unfortunately, are in great danger right now, by the way. The pyramids of Meroe, that date back from 800 BC to 350 BC. Very similar. This is a tomb that was dedicated to Cestius, and existed between the Vatican and the mausoleum of Adrian, but then was demolished later. The Pantheon, of course, he made multiple etchings of the Pantheon. This is a rather close-up of it. There are some showing the whole piazza in front of it. And what you see around is, again, the scale of people that are around it make the building look even larger. As you can see, there were still these towers that had been added, that have been removed since. This was because the Pantheon had been turned into a church. But this has fortunately been removed, and in doing so, they restored the original architecture of the Pantheon. The inside of the Pantheon is also extraordinary. The interior, when you see the detail of his line, he has such a way of etching that makes it so crisp and beautiful. But again, the scale of the figures make it a much more dramatic interior, though it is dramatic by itself. I'm not sure it needed more, but definitely this is exaggerating the grandeur of the interior of the Pantheon. Same for St. Paul outside the walls. But again, the beautiful rendering of all the frescoes that are along the nave, and the beauty of the columns in the Corinthian capital. These are very large etchings, by the way. The Basilica Vaticana, of course, the colonnade of Bernini had been built the century before, and enhances, of course, that entrance to St. Peter greatly. The Trevi fountain that we saw before, again, rendered really well, with an interesting distorted perspective between the front figures and the people around the fountain. The distance is not that great. The Spanish steps, the Piazza di Spagna with the Spanish steps going to the Trinità dei Monti. This was at that time unpaved, as you can see, and this is a fountain built by Bernini very young. And then the condition, this was towards the end, we see that his line is getting a little darker. This is a view of what the Forum Romano looked like. It was called at that time the Campo Vaccino because people would bring their cows and other animals to literally stay in that place that was one of the most vacant place in the middle of Rome. But of course, you can see all the beautiful Roman monuments that existed there are falling apart. You can see the arch and towards the end. But the cattle would be just roaming around. It is around 1743 when he went back to Venice that he is going to, oh, by the way, you can see the Colosseum there towards the back. He's going to come with a series that is absolutely extraordinary. It's called the Carceri d'Invenzione, so the prisons, invented prisons. It's made of 16 prints and is purely, it's absolutely frightening almost when you see them. They typically show enormous subterranean vaults and then machines and stairs that sometimes end on nothing. Some of the finest prints that he ever made. And as I say, he's going to come back at them and we'll see what you call the first state and the second state, how he's going to make it even more dramatic. I will give you access to a wonderful work that has been done by young men. Gerard, I have to find his name here. Grégoire Dupont. He's a Frenchman. And I will give you the site to go and see it, and you can probably see it when you look at my PowerPoint. But he has used all the 12 prints and mixed them and give you a feeling of 3 dimension and gives you a chance to move in. This is really, and the music is extraordinary. He brings them alive. I'm going to stop here because it goes on for quite a while, but I really encourage you. I'm going to give you the site. Go and listen. It's fascinating. It also gives you an idea of the variety of incision by Piranesi in his plate. So that gives you all the difference between that stippling that you have there and lines there. Then you have little curves here and there that completely change the feeling. So this is one of these plates. This is what they call the first state. So that was done early on. And then 16 years later, he's going to darken it by insisting on more lines and then putting it back into the bath of acid bath that you use for etchings. So absolutely incredible change between this, which is rather light in mood, and then here very, very dark. Same thing with the smoking fire. So you have the fire there. And then the second state where he's going to really darken his lines. And again, as I said, he goes back, darkens it, and then puts it again in the acid bath, which is going to bite the copper plate much deeper. The giant wheel. This is the arch. Again, see the incredible difference between this and this, really making it so much more dramatic. These plates were extremely successful with people that were in the Grand Tour. What was the Grand Tour? During the 17th and 18th century, it became a traditional trip to be taken by some young European men from the upper class. You needed quite a bit of money. They were very often accompanied by a tutor, also called a cicerone. This was influenced by many, by literature, including the one by John Locke of Essay concerning human understanding. The whole idea was that your mind would be formed not only by reading something, but by being exposed to different cultures and by different buildings and different, even different studies in different countries. And so this became really part of what you had to do to be a well-rounded person. So what would happen is that they would travel through foreign land. They would come back with writings, report their findings on human nature for the poor ones that could not have traveled just like they had. It was offering a liberal education. They would also acquire a whole series of objects, from knickknacks to statues, depending on their means. Statues and books, and for those that couldn't buy a painting by Canaletto or Guardi, then they could get some prints by Piranesi, which was really becoming very famous for that. And these were the ones that were circulating and tempting other people to come down. It also caused a kind of a contrast between the Northern and Southern Europe, whereas the North was the place where everything happened. The South was the land of the past, as Lamartine said, where everything sleeps. The typical itinerary would be going to Paris, of course, coming from England or coming from Germany. All the countries in Europe would have people traveling. So depending on their country of origin, they would take different itinerary. But Paris would be on the map and then go to Geneva or Lausanne, go through the Alps, of course, to go down to Italy, would start with Turin, maybe Milan, definitely Florence. They would spend months literally in Florence, would go to Pisa, would go back to Padua north and go Bologna, Venice, and then from Venice would come down to Rome and then now south to close to Naples with Herculaneum Pompeii, sometimes would go to the island of Malta, and then would go back north to Vienna, Munich, and the Netherlands. This was typically some of the cities that they were visiting. And Piranesi became really part of the temptation for everybody to go there. As I mentioned, Piranesi became, I mentioned with Winkelmann that he was the one that really set the idea of the Greek art versus the Roman art. And Piranesi became really the defender of Roman art. He was very much, he believed that first of all, the architecture from Rome wasn't coming from the Greek, but was coming from the Etruscan, and in many ways he was right. But he wasn't as enthused by Greek art as Winkelmann was. So he was part of that debate. He is one of the last series he did, which is the Antiquità Romane, so the Roman antiquity, where he is going to describe in a more prestigious way some of the Roman monuments that were left in Rome. And this is one of his large etching about the Campus Martius, showing building the way they used to be, or at least he thought that they used to be. So you have the theater there of Statili Tori. The Colosseum, of course, which is originally the amphitheater of Flavio. The Arch of Trajan, and this is the way it was at the time of Piranesi. So you can see all these plants growing all around. And of course, this is, as you say, the beginning of decay.
Is everyone seeing the changes? I'm only seeing the first frontispiece.
Oh, are you? We are encountering problems, it looks like. You're not seeing, is it coming or is it just slow?
There we go.
Piranesi
There's the
art.
Colosseum.
Now I see the Colosseum.
Okay.
I
So
see
you-
number 61.
I
Arch
see
of
61.
Trajan.
I see 61. Slide 61.
Arch of Trajan, yeah.
I have number 59.
Oh, wow. So your system is slow. And then we can't blame the PowerPoint. That's unfortunately Zoom who is responsible for that.
Okay, now I have 61.
Okay, so
Might be the internet connection you have.
yeah, that's it. So as you can see on 61, the Arch of Trajan, you can see how the whole area there is overgrown with the plants, which are very detrimental to these old buildings. The Temple of Minerva Medica, which was used to be one of the great temples in Rome, obviously falling apart. And one of the largest one is Adrian's Villa. Adrian's Villa was absolutely extraordinary. And I'm going to come back to this one yet, but I want to show you, this is the plan of the whole compound of the Villa of Adrian as it used to be. This is what is left of it. And the one that I just showed you, sorry. Here is the canopus, which was at the end of that pool of water that was in the middle there, was a place where they had the library and they had a series of niches with the statues of the important philosophers and writers of the past. So this was a very large building, but as you can see, completely falling apart with some
61, I don't.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm stuck on 61.
I am stuck on 61.
I can't do anything from my part, so I will wait until you come to the 63.
I'm on 63.
Just on 62.
Okay.
Wow.
So the internet must be overloaded right now. So tell me when you're on 63. Are you on 63?
No, still on 62.
Wow. So sorry, guys.
Now I've got
I'm
it.
on-
Now I've got 63.
I'm on
Hadrian
63.
Villa.
Okay.
Got 63.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah, this is an incredible part of the monument, and I will show you in a minute how it used to look. But this is again the Piranesi way, where he's distorting the scale between the figures and the incredible monument behind. This used to be called the room of the philosophers. It was one of the most striking and best preserved part of the villa. The name Canopus comes from a temple that was dedicated to Serapis, the Egyptian god Serapis. And so Adrian, who was extremely well learned, really wanted his house to be also a testimony to culture and literature. He is, I hope you now on the same page as I am. But it shows you the compound of the villa as it was, and the incredible.
63.
Okay, it's gonna come to the next one.
Not yet.
Are you to the next one or not
There
yet?
we go. There
Okay.
we go.
So as you can see on that reconstruction of the Adrian's villa, the incredible compound, where you had places where you could just walk and enjoy the conversation. You had a small theater, you had all kinds of buildings that were integrated in that compound. The etching that you just saw is in fact a representation of what you have here at the end of the pool, which was considered the canopus, the room of the philosophers. So you can see how the scale has been distorted by Piranesi in his etching. Now, Piranesi had his hands in different things. He was also a restorer. And this is one of the many vases. I hope you can see the vase. Are you on the vase?
Yes, we're on the base. I'm on the base.
Okay. So this vase was actually more or less what you can call a creation by Piranesi, who rebuilt this vase with multiple pieces of other vases that were in pieces. And so apparently at that time it was authorized, and that Piranesi vase is now at the British Museum and well explained as a part of the customs of the time. It wasn't forbidden to take different pieces, put them together and pretend that it was an original vase. So this is a very large vase. It's 107 inches high. So to give you an idea, and it is at the British Museum, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's partly made from a crater that was in the style of the Borghese vase. So he took some examples around him and redid it, and I assume did some corrections too, but it's quite an interesting thing. So a fascinating man, Piranesi, who was apparently had a strong character, would not shy away from discussion, and but produced an incredible body of work. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm so sorry that the internet was slow and I can't do anything about that. Next time on November 13th, we'll look at the extravagant architecture in the German states. And there we're mostly going to look at architecture We will have some paintings, but mostly architecture in these absolutely incredible buildings that were built by all these princes. Don't forget, Germany was made of about 300 and some states at the time. And so many of them, the richest, would just build these little Versailles to be on the map. So by this time, let me just stop the recording.